A conflict that felt like it was thousands of miles away has suddenly, dramatically exploded in the Indian Ocean, and it's landed right on India's doorstep. So let's break down exactly how this happened.
It all kicked off with one single, devastating moment deep under the waves.
And that's really the big question we're tackling today. The answer? Well, it involves a warship that was on a diplomatic mission, a submarine lurking in the depths, and an attack that basically rewrote the rules of modern naval warfare.
Okay, so let's start with the incident that lit the fuse on this whole crisis. It takes us to a pretty unexpected flashpoint, far, far away from the Persian Gulf.
This right here is the ship at the very center of the storm, the IRIS Dena. It's actually one of Iran's most modern frigates.
And this is what makes the whole situation so explosive. See, the Tignama wasn't out on some combat patrol. It was actually sailing home after taking part in the Malan naval exercises in India. It was there as a guest of the Indian Navy. It was in international waters, pretty close to Sri Lanka, when a U.S. submarine attacked it, completely out of the blue with zero warning.
The human cost was immediate, and it was staggering. 87 Iranian sailors were killed in that attack.
Now, to really underscore just how serious this was, the U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth put it in these really stark historical terms. Now, naval historians might argue about the exact specifics of that claim, but the message from the U.S. was crystal clear. This was a major escalation, an act of aggression we really haven't seen for decades.
Well, Iran's response was swift, and it made one thing absolutely clear. They were not about to back down from this fight.
This really lays out the dangerous cycle that started right after. The U.S. sinks an Iranian frigate, and then, just a few days later, Iran hits back by striking a really high-value American target, an oil tanker near Kuwait. This is a classic textbook tit-for-tat escalation.
Iran's foreign ministry, you can bet, did not mince words. This statement just perfectly captures their outrage. They called this sinking an atrocity, and promised that the U.S. would live to regret setting this new, really dangerous precedent of attacking ships without warning in international waters.
All right, let's pull back for a second and look at the bigger picture here. This one's sinking. It wasn't some isolated event. It was actually part of America's much broader strategy for what it calls the Iran problem.
The U.S. even gave its campaign a name, Operation Epic Fury. So you can see, this wasn't just a single retaliatory strike. No, this was part of a much larger, systematic effort to completely dismantle Iran's military capabilities.
And the claims coming from the U.S. Secretary of Defense have been incredibly bold. He publicly declared that Iran's air force is, quote, no more, and that its navy rests at the bottom of the Gulf. I mean, the message couldn't be any clearer. The U.S. goal here is total military dominance over Iran.
And to back those claims up, U.S. Central Command has reported sinking a total of 20 Iranian warships. So the sinking of the Dena, while it was shocking because of where it happened, was really just one piece of a much, much wider naval campaign.
So how does all of this end up affecting India? Well, this is the point where a distant conflict becomes a serious crisis right in its own neighborhood.
First, we got to tackle the misinformation. A claim started making the rounds on a U.S. news channel that the U.S. was using Indian naval bases for its attacks. India's Ministry of External Affairs had to jump in and issue a swift, very firm denial, calling these claims absolutely false.
But, even without any direct military involvement, the danger for India is very, very real. I mean, this isn't just a fight in the Persian Gulf anymore, it's happening in India's own backyard. With torpedoes and missiles now in play in the Indian Ocean, the safety of these vital trade routes is at risk, and that raises some really urgent questions about regional security.
And all of this brings us to the strategic dilemma. Even if the U.S. achieves total naval and air superiority, what does winning this war actually look like? Because the reality on the ground, well, it paints a very different picture. Iran is a geographical fortress. It's flanked by these massive mountain ranges, the Zagros and the Alborz. Defeating a navy at sea is one thing, but trying to conquer this kind of terrain with ground troops, that's an entirely different and maybe impossible challenge. And that leaves us with the final and most critical question. If the U.S. can win the war at sea, but Iran's geography makes a decisive victory on land almost impossible, what's the end game here? That's the complex reality of a conflict that has now spilled into the Indian Ocean with really no clear end in sight.